What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Indie Inkwell. My name is JJ. I am one of your two co-hosts. Unfortunately, my co-host yet again is not going to be able to make it this week. Longbox is once again training some of our fine men and women in the Air Force. So he will be back next week, though. I have it on good authority. So with that in mind, let's welcome our guest, indie comic book writer and creator of Ithaqa, Michael Watson. What is going on, my friend?
Hey, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure, man. So the first thing we like to do on the show is kind of get everybody's origin story. Kind of how did you get into comic books? Was this like a lifelong thing from childhood? Is this something you kind of only got into recently as an adult? Like what kind of got everything started in this direction?
I would say my first serious dive into comics came kind of like mid to late high school, so a little bit I think later than other people.
Okay.
It was really weird. I had a philosophy club teacher in high school, and he just kept talking about Neil Gaiman's The Sandman comic like over and over and over again. And eventually I was like, okay, I've got to check this out. We've got Thor like bargaining for like the gates of hell, with like the incarnation of dreams. I was like, this seems too crazy. I've got to check it out. And so at that point I kind of like bought the first one and then just like dropped all of the money I had to buy all of them and read them. And so from then on, I was definitely invested in kind of reading and consuming comic books. And in terms of kind of my journey towards writing comic books, I had always wanted to actually be a filmmaker and a screenwriter. And as my thesis,
That's a pretty common thing I've heard comic book writers and artists say, like, I was trying to get into the film industry.
well, what happened was one of my pet peeves in film school was like you'd be you're 18, 19, 20, and everyone's trying to make a big thesis film that's like Goodfellas, and so you've got these like kids who like can't grow a beard, and they're like, you gotta get me my money, or like just it was like it's absurd. You don't have the budget or the actors or like the skills yet to pull off what you're trying to do.
Right.
And what I loved about comic books is that I don't have to worry about like, can I feasibly film this or even, animate this in CGI? It was just like, I write the script and then someone illustrates it. And so that's the cliff notes of my origin story into the comic book world.
So you didn't start off with superheroes really at all then? So did
No,
like that was like never really your cup of tea or?
I mean, I love superheroes.
Okay.
But yeah, no, in terms of writing, that never even occurred to me. I guess because I got in on the ground floor with the Sandman.
I was
I
gonna
was
say that's
always,
kind of like I don't want to say like a snobbish comic book to start with, but it kind of is as far as like super hardcore readers go.
although you do get John Constantine, Martian Manhunter, Superman, and Batman kind of sprinkled like at the periphery of it all. So there's
Yeah, exactly. So like was that really what kind of just got you immediately was the Sandman stuff? And then after you got done with Sandman, what like kind of kept you there?
I did. I think I went from Sandman to Watchmen, so I did kind of pull back into the you know into the superhero adjacent kind of space. But
But that's kind of like right there though, that's not really superheroes. It's kind of like borderline.
yeah, yeah, really, it is pretty borderline. Later on, when I moved to Hoboken for a number of years, and the Hoboken Public Library, shout out to them, had a huge wall of like every comic ever. And so at that point, I was able to kind of go through like all of Hellboy, all of Miles Morales, all of Spider Gwen, like a decent amount of like X-Men and stuff like that. So I later, was able to get my hands on more superhero comics. But from a writing perspective, I guess I was always interested in kind of like those weird supernatural, metaphysical, spiritual horror amalgams.
No, there's nothing wrong with that for sure because like I feel like a lot of people get burnt out on superheroes after a while, but you kind of started already not in there. So
Yeah,
you kind of had a leg up on that. You're like, I'm not going to get burnt out on superheroes. I'm just now getting into them. Like,
exactly. Yeah. I think I remember Alan Moore said something along the lines of that, like, he's like, the new generation of people, like, they deserve more than just, Batman or Superman. No, no, shade to them. I love them a lot. But we've, had 100 years
I
of
mean, I'm
them.
wearing a Spider-Man hoodie. Like,
Yeah. And, honestly, I'm a huge Batman Beyond fan, actually, in general. So,
oh, Terry McGinnis is awesome. I mean, come on.
yeah, it's like the things I like about Spider-Man, but in a Batman costume.
Right, exactly. So, was there like a particular writer or an artist that you were like, I think I can do this?
Well,
Was singular, like, aha moment where you're like, "This is what I wanna do," rather than either the filmmaking or maybe even doing novels or something like that?
I would say Neil Gaiman was definitely my kind of like, I don't know if we can swear on stream, but my, "Oh my god, I need
As lo
to,"
the only thing we ask is to keep the F-bombs to a minimum. Let's
yeah, totally fair, totally fair. Yeah, I would say Neil Gaiman just opened, like, my imagination to, like, what comics could be, what stories could be, this, like, crazy idea that, like, gods walk among us but require our belief in them, and they're kind of like weak homeless people living in New York City, even though they're like,
these
the one.
all-powerful cosmic beings, like
Exactly, yeah, and that just, like, completely, I don't know, like, I don't know, hummed in my brain, like, I just was like, "Oh, I'm in this forever." Over time, I would say I started to bring in a lot of Stephen King, not comic
okay.
book-wise, but just, like, as, like, a horror influence, in the Dark Tower series, was just so
Such an
amazing.
underrated series by him, honestly, like, I feel like Stephen King gets a
Unbelievable.
lot of hate for his over descriptiveness of some things in his books, but,
Mhm.
I mean, you can't argue with the man's resume, like
People got so mad that it got really meta in like the back half. But I think that was like the coolest thing ever, because the whole, I don't know, underlying structure of the Dark Tower series is that it's like this multiverse framework that links literally everything he's ever written or could write, and also our reality. And so people are like, "Oh, it gets too meta." Like when he meets himself and like, blah blah blah. And it's like, well, if you believe in the multiverse theory and you believe that like, Roland is out there trying to like, keep the beams connected, then of course, there's going to be like a Stephen King out in the world. But I thought it was brilliant, to be honest.
I was just say I think it's cool when they add little stuff like that because it just gives you something different in the story, like, especially with the Dark Tower series, it's such a long book series, and
Yeah,
he's such a long-winded writer anyway. It takes a
yeah.
lot to get to that point, and it's nice to get, like, a little bit of a plot freshener, if you will, throughout it.
And it's fun because even like I picked up, I think it was Hearts and Atlantis at our local bookstore, and like one of like the really pivotal characters in like the back half of the Dark Tower series is kind of like a pretty important character in this like short story about like growing up pre-Vietnam. And I was like, I think I know this guy, like, and he's like really got strong psychic powers. Like, what's going on with this? What's he doing here? Just like living a sad life in some like middle of nowhere town.
I think we all end up at that point at some time or another, like, we all end up somewhere we just do not wanna be, like
Yeah, same with Daniel Torrance from The Shining, right? He's like the most powerful like psychic user in the human realm, and he's just like an alcoholic, working at like hospice care eventually.
Right. So when you decided to kind of first start your comic book creation journey, was Ithaca the first thing you tried to make, or was there anything before that? Or
I guess it would be my third. The
I would say,
first,
were there some failed projects that you just didn't end up finishing or just didn't work out? Or I'm always
yeah.
interested to hear about like the stuff that failed first and then this,
Mhm.
okay, now I got it. Now let's go.
Yeah, yeah. The first thing was like I would say it was a success. Like it was part of my thesis, where Super Neil Gaiman, where I kind of wanted to do like this little web comic, kind of like 10 issues, or not issues, I guess 10 pages, where like at the prophecy department of Pandem Inc., which is kind of like a bureaucracy within hell. They kind of like
Okay.
misfile some paperwork and set the apocalypse in motion like many hundreds of years too early.
Oh,
And
fun.
so it's kind of, yeah, I kind of said it was like it's like Dilbert meets Paradise Lost, is kind of like how I try to pitch it to my
Okay,
fellow.
that sounds great.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed that, and that I think was a success, on its own terms. And then I later turned to I was going to try and do like a full epic graphic novel thing that I called like Angel of the Gray, which was going to be this kind of like weird purgatory story where like kind of like I don't know. Have you ever seen the movie Ink, which is like a deep cut? If not, it's okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's like this very weird indie film where there's kind of like this in between realm on top of ours, and there are all these beings trying to influence you. And if you're like really depressed, it might be that like these things are kind of like feeding off of you. And so I was kind of trying to create this mythology of like when you die, there's kind of like this intermediary place that you go, and you have to kind of try and reconstruct like your memories of who you were in your life, in order to go on, to move on. And it completely fell apart for me. I I like I learned what kind of writer I was, which is that I'm more Stephen King in terms of like I just start with the premise and need to just like kind of not know where it's going and just follow it, as opposed to like a George R. R. Martin who like plots it out and is like super precise.
It takes him
Because
like
I
6, 7 years to write another book.
exactly, yeah. And so I plotted the whole thing out with like what's called like the snowflake method, where you kind of have like the three main plot points, and then you find 3 points in those, and you kind of do three within those. And so I like did all this
Okay.
work and was like, great, I wrote the novel, time to connect the dots. And it just felt like dead and stale. And there was no life in it because I guess like there was no room for the characters to like surprise me or change their minds or what have you. And
Because
so
it was
eventually I
almost too
scrapped
planned out.
100%. Yeah. I learned that that's not how I write. And then from there we went to Ithaca Comic.
I was saying, and then speaking of going into the Ithaca comic, you were referred to us by your artist on Ithaca, Teresa. I'm always gonna mess up her last name, I swear. It's
Yeki.
Kiyaki, I believe.
Yes.
Okay, she was one of our guests all the way back on episode 8. If you guys haven't seen that, please go check it out. She is awesome. Her book, Drawn to Key West, is amazing. But how did you guys kind of link up? Because I know that was one of her first, like, actual comic book projects.
Yeah, I snagged her while she was like still her senior year in college at the School of Visual Arts, which
Yeah,
is
that's what she said, because she said one of her art teachers had said that she draws like a middle-aged man from Connecticut, I believe was the quote.
what? What?
And she was like, "What?" Like, me
I
and my co-host
disagree.
both heard that. We're like, "What does that even mean? Like, how does that work?"
Strong disagree. I feel like she draws like a golden age 2D animation Disney cartoon, but with
I
like
would say that's a much closer description.
darker undertone, 100%. Yeah. But yeah, so I had started with the comic itself had initially started as like a short film. First it was a nightmare I had in college, um,
Okay.
which like later. Oh yes, see Teresa's art, the greatest thing about the comic, in my
Oh, I mean,
opinion.
the artwork is insane. Ever since I first found Teresa's stuff, I was like, "Oh, this is great."
Oh, yeah, and issue 4, I've got issue 4 with me. I can show you because we kind of like really ramp up to like new crazy visual places with issue 4, which is like we go full psychedelic cosmic horror.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I'll try and find my favorite 2 pages, but
I was like, 'cause it's already a pretty trippy series enough as it is.
no, we completely blow the lid off in issue 4. I have to say, like we go to this place called the Loom, and like we draw characters off model, so like the proportions start to kind of get super
Oh,
wonky and
okay.
strange. And then
I
my
love
favorite,
it.
let's see, my favorite page. Spoilers. I don't gotta buy the comic, everyone. Oh well. But this is when they travel through the Loom, and it's just like I think some of the most amazing and striking work I've ever seen. And Teresa is just nothing short of a genius, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
it's amazing. That is
So
that's fantastic. Okay, yeah, now I gotta get my hands on the rest.
that's our issue for psychedelic wormhole, and then we kind of pull back issue 5 a little bit back into reality again. But for people whose entry point is like the psychedelic horror visuals, like don't worry, there's plenty of more strange stuff coming. It's not just going to be an issue 4.
That's awesome. But you linked up with her when she was still, graduating college. How did you kind of find her?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I put out an ad on several platforms, for both a letterer and for an illustrator, and she responded on DeviantArt, which was something that like I didn't even know was still like active at the
I was
time.
gonna say, yeah, I recently found out that's still a thing. I was like, wow, that survived a lot. Like,
Yeah, yeah. There was another guy who had responded. I think Comic Silk was the other platform. I can't remember. It's been like 5 or 6 years now. And he did pretty good work, but it was like only in black and white. And yeah, I don't know, we just didn't kind of click very well. And Teresa, loves tarot cards, loves folklore, loves horror, and so like that
oh
was kind of
yeah.
like my pitch on DeviantArt was like 1920s horror film, tarot card, kind of imagery philosophy. And she was like, if you went to her website at the time, like those were like the exact things that she says she's interested in. So it was
It
really,
was a perfect fit.
it was yeah, the cosmos brought us together for this perfect timeline for sure.
No, and I think it resulted in some amazing stuff. So for people who have never heard of it, never seen it before, kind of give us a rundown on the synopsis of what Ithaca is and kind of what it's all about.
Yeah, so it's a 1920s Lovecraftian horror story set in Ithaca, New York, and kind of the surrounding Tompkins area. And it's a group of misfits who are all kind of either down on their luck or working through different things, who all, for different reasons, kind of get pulled into this local ad. This was a point in time in America when the spiritualist movement was like full swing. There were like Wall Street brokers, who would like commune with the spirits to help you decide, what stocks to buy, tarot cards and seances and all kinds of things. So like the premise of this is that like there's this local landowner, Barnaby Hayes, who has bought this piece of this estate, and people are uncomfortable around it, and so he wants to hire some spiritualist investigators to kind of give it a clean bill of health, so we can kind of build a nice resort on it, and people won't
Oh,
feel
so that's
uncomfortable.
pretty much this exact scene, actually.
Yes, this is it. There's Barnaby. And yes, boy, so kind of there's a fun mix in the initial group of people who are there for purely cynical reasons versus people who are there who like earnestly believe in like kind of like ghosts and spirits. And so Mookie Smith's kind of the main character who we enter the story with is a down on his luck filmmaker. In Ithaca, New York, in the 1910s and early 20s, there was a film studio that kind of predated Hollywood. It was a big one where they would get all the big stars from New York City to ride the train up to New York City and be in their different, the Wharton studio, their films. And so Mookie, an oyster shucker from New York City, really wants to make it big in this new industry, pre-Hollywood industry. And he's kind of borrowing and stealing his way into trying to make a movie. And so he sees this ad in the paper and thinks, oh my God, this is perfect. I'll just film, these suckers in the woods. They'll be jumping at their own, shadow. We'll have some spooky shots of some ruins, and like this is gonna write itself. Kind of like if you ever
I
seen
was say even like convinces the landowner like we need to have it on film for actual physical evidence.
Yes, yeah, he gets to expense the film for the
Yeah.
investigation. He's having Barnaby pay him to make the film, which is pretty fun.
I mean, if you're gonna swindle your way into a movie making career, what better way to do it than to trick somebody else into paying the money for it, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, I respect it. Like the more I kind of like pulled apart his history, his backstory, I'm like, honestly, like I fully respect what he's doing and what he's trying to do.
So, what made you decide to base this back in like the pre-Hollywood era? Because I think people probably assume that movies and stuff was just always made in Hollywood, and they think
Yeah,
Broadway when they think New York.
totally, exactly. And so so a big part of it was just pure like nostalgia and missing the city of Ithaca because I went to college in Ithaca, the Park School, which is where the Wharton studio used to be.
Okay.
And just missed it a lot. And so it became a choice. I kind of got into role playing the Call of Cthulhu, table RPG. And so I just kind of just out of just nostalgia and as a habit would just start setting all of my stories in Ithaca, New York, because 1920s is a really interesting time for all kinds of reasons. It's like the advent of technology that we recognize, but it's still kind of close enough to the old country that spirits and things are like super prevalent in people's kind of imaginations, and you don't really have like medicines that are accepted. And also like just in history, like Cornell University, for example, was like hoarding Egyptian artifacts in the 1920s, and so this stuff kind
Oh
of
yeah,
like
because they were also thinking like most of those artifacts were cursed, and
Mhm.
like there was all kinds of stuff going on back then. They
Exactly,
didn't really exactly have mental illness tracked yet either. So,
exactly, yeah,
you could be possessed if you're depressed or
right.
like
Yeah, your sleep paralysis demon was an actual demon back then,
yeah, exactly. Well, I'll bet that's where that term comes from. I'm no expert, so don't quote me on that, anybody, but it makes
Mhm.
sense to me.
Yeah, and a big part of like a Lovecraftian story is having that Ivy League, buttoned up university with like the library and kind of the spooky tomes in it. And
Mhm.
so Ithaca, just because of Cornell, kind of checked a lot of the like kind of like peak Lovecraft boxes, but is never really utilized in stories. I think like the only like major example of like Ithaca as a city in like in popular media is Road Trip. When they
Oh,
I think
that does start in there in
yeah, it's
Ithaca,
Ithaca
doesn't it?
University, not Ithaca College.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
I forgot all about that.
So yeah, so just kind of like all the history I kind of gathered having gone to school here and then kind of building out my own Call of Cthulhu campaigns in the Ithaca region, kind of like built the soil that Ithaca grew out of.
No, that's awesome. So you like or were there any like kind of local folklore that you were able to draw from for this at all, or is it just kind of all stuff you've kind of just envisioned in your head from doing the Cthulhu stuff and just reading a bunch of Lovecraft?
It's a combination. So like a lot of the hard tangible history is actual Ithaca history. Because
Okay.
kind of once again to kind of go back to Neil Gaiman and the Sandman never really left me. Part of what I loved about the Sandman is that you're doing like stuff with like gods and goddesses, but then you're like kind of like doing the actual like history of like William Shakespeare or of that guy in California who declared himself the emperor and no one cared, but he like really was crazy and doing that. And
Right.
so it kind of I find it's a way to kind of ground things. We are later on going to get to some interesting kind of local folklores. Like there's a serial killer whose brain's in a jar, they say in Ithaca. So that is probably going to pop up at some point. But most of the mythos, I'd say almost all the mythos side is me at this point.
Gotcha. Because I mean, there is a lot of, the mental hospital scenes. Like this whole series screams 1920s. And I think that Teresa kind of nailed everybody's outfits in these scenes,
Mhm.
like just the style of everything.
Yeah, we have like such a comprehensive reference document. We have like it's both a Google document and also in like baked into the scripts that I send her, where it's like and also because Ithaca had Cornell, there's so many photographs of Ithaca in the 1920s, which really helps. And so I can send her pictures of old buildings and costumes, and I can send her actual Wharton Studio films, so you can kind of see what the actresses look like and their costumes and the cameras, etc. And then also like I intersperse like lots of like Bloodborne and Kingdom Hearts or other random visual references that kind of
Hey,
slowly
I'm
make
never
their way.
gonna be mad at somebody putting visual Kingdom Hearts references into things because that's one of my favorite games of all time.
Absolutely, the Heartless are a fantastic reference for spooky
Oh,
shit.
100%. So what explain this, like, we've got, like, a little cult scene going on here, it looks like. I wanted to pull just kind of a couple random scenes and kinda just get your
Hmm.
explanation on them.
Yeah, so I guess where to start. So the cult itself is kind of loosely based off of an actual cult that is in Ithaca.
Oh,
Um,
fun.
yeah, that they do dress still kind of like in I guess Amish clothing, and they never blink. They're very they run a few businesses around here,
They never
and so
blink?
yeah, like I mean they probably do, but when you gotta go to order your like your coffee, they're just like I had a girlfriend in college at the time, and they were trying to get her to like marry into the cult, and so they would always give her free food at their business establishment, and they kept always asking like when are your parents going to be in town, because they wanted to like ask for permission from the parents to like
Oh my goodness.
marry. Yeah, so there's some weird creepy underbelly stuff there, and so I kind of used visual inspiration for kind of the
I was
framework.
gonna say, you got material for days with people like that around, man.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But in terms of that scene with the camera, that was kind of one of the earlier aha moments for like deciding the mythos of the series, which is that in a lot of whether it's werewolves or other supernatural things, you always talk about either like pure silver, can kill vampires potentially and other things, and then also salt. You always have like salt circles,
Mhm.
and salt purifies and all kinds of other things like that. And it was such an amazing aha moment for me when I realized as a film major that back then, and even to this day to some extent, film stock has silver halide crystals, painted on the emulsion side of every single frame,
Oh,
aka
really?
silver salts. And so when are filming, you're kind of like chemically exposing silver and salt to that moment.
Ah, see, I'm learning stuff today.
Yeah, and because ultimately, light spoilers, we do get into kind of multiversal time travel, higher dimensional beings. The idea of a camera became like this kind of, I don't know, like kryptonite to some of the lower level life forms here, because lower like our level, like human level,
Right.
because you're kind of taking snapshots of a moment in time, and you're using silver and salt to do that. So you're kind of disrupting, because like if you're a fourth or fifth dimensional being, you kind of like, I've heard people describe like, to a fourth dimensional being, your life is like the whole roller coaster. But when you're at our level, like you're just in the car on the roller coaster. And so to have a camera kind of like breaking up this kind of flow is confusing, disorienting, potentially painful. And so that's what's going on there with the camera.
That's wild. I'm learning all kinds
maybe
of
it comes
stuff
back
today.
later on in the series. We'll have to see.
That's awesome, though. So what made you go the route to, because this is self-published, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What made you decide to go that route rather, or did you just try to pitch it to some places? And then what made you ultimately decide to self-publish it?
Mm-hmm. It started out, I kind of approached it initially from a filmmaker perspective, which was like, unfortunately, the wrong perspective. And if Teresa was here, we could definitely talk about like all the times that I like write things in the script from a filmmaker's perspective that just don't work from an illustration perspective. She's super patient with me when it comes to 6 years in, I've gotten much better about that.
Right.
But,
so you guys have been working together for a while now. I imagine that's getting a little bit smoother.
yeah, definitely. And so I thought, like in the film industry, a lot of times what you would do is you'd make a short film and use it as a proof of concept to try and pitch to get money or a budget to go with like a studio or someone to make a feature length film or something like that. And so I was like, okay, I'll just finance the first issue and have all the scripts, and then we'll take that first issue and we'll try and get published at literally anyone. And from there, then I won't have to pay for the issue out of pocket, and it'll all be great. And it didn't work out.
Really?
I'd be surprised to find out it wasn't that easy, actually. And so I think we got maybe 2.5 issues done actually, while I was submitting to all kinds of publishers, like big, like Dark Horse, small ones that like never was ever heard of. And we heard back from 2 of them. One, Soaring Penguin Press, shout out to them, they're fantastic. And they actually gave us, like, they said not right now, but maybe in the future when it's all finished. But in the meantime, here are like several pages of really, really thought out notes about like what you could do to improve.
That's the best feedback you can get, is when somebody's actually like, hey, here's what I think you can improve on, rather than just a no.
Yeah, it fundamentally changed the trajectory of the comic. It was like one of those moments where I was like, oh shit, because like the notes were good, they made sense. I could see how they were right. And so John was the guy that got back to us. And so I actually I'd written the entire script, like 600 pages or something, and I ended up throwing out like, I don't know, 400 pages.
Wow.
Because I had to make changes in the beginning that completely sent the trajectory somewhere else. And what was really painful is that we even had to scrap some of the artwork that I had paid for with Teresa. And so I had to pay for it twice, and that was so painful. And it got so scrappy that at one point I was like removing the dialogue bubbles from people in the frame, and then like cutting the panels out in Photoshop and rearranging them to create a different conversation and a different flow. So that way,
hey, you got to do what you got to do, man.
Yeah. And so then we started what I call the remix era of the of Ithaqa comic, where we had issue 1 remix, which was they used to be 24 pages, and then they kind of now are 32 to 36 an issue.
Yeah, they're nice little chunky books.
Yeah, they are.
Which I appreciate, because I'm a binge reader, so I like a good, I like a good amount to read at once.
I know. I was Googling at the time, like what's the longest, like you're allowed to do as a, as like a floppy.
I don't think there's any limit, man. It's just whatever your readers are willing to put up with, I think.
Right, exactly. They were like, yeah, like Watchmen, Alan Moore were like, I think 32 pages, like an issue. And I was like, okay, we can do that then. It's okay.
Right. But then like some things only come out in graphic novel form. So you've got like a 500-page epic. Humanoids does that a lot. They do these like 600-700 page, just epic sized graphic novels. And it's like, y'all have no chill. Like,
yeah. I just read Low volumes 1 and 2, and like, it's like this tall and like this thick.
It's insane.
Yeah. But so at that point, I like had burned through like my own money and was like not doing well as a freelance video editor because like it's kind of very boomer bust where like you're making great money and then all of a
Trust
sudden
me,
you
I
have
know
nothing.
that gig. That's what I do.
We can commiserate there. And so
Yes.
and so I was like, I need to continue this. Well, I really want to continue this, but like I just literally cannot keep fronting the money. Because one thing that we've been really, I think, really good about is that I've always been like, Teresa, what what is your time like worth to you? How much is this worth? And we have to find a way to like pay you that. Because I don't believe that anyone should kind of like be subsidizing like your dream,
Mhm.
where like believe me, like when we're really big, you're gonna get like 5 points on the back end. It's gonna be so great. And I
Bro,
just
I'm gonna pay you in exposure. It's gonna be awesome.
yeah, I've really
Oh,
never
I
been
don't know how many
about
times I've
that.
heard that.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, and I've never been about that. And so I was like, Teresa, like what's your hourly, or like what to you, what's like this worth per page, and we just have to figure out how to raise that much to make it happen. And so hence Kickstarter entered the picture, and we kind of began
Kickstarter has
kickstarting.
saved so many comic book writers' careers, I swear to God.
Yeah, yeah, 3 Kickstarters deep, and that's the only reason why we are funded at the moment.
I think it shows something bigger about the industry itself, though. Like, it's really starting to lean towards that crowdfunded. I
Mhm.
mean,
Well,
even some of the bigger publishers are crowdfunding their books.
yeah, well, it's wild because there was this like crazy boom and then bust with NFTs in the comic book industry.
I
Um,
saw that. Like,
yeah,
luckily, I didn't really hop on that train while it was in the station, but I
yeah, it
saw a lot of
was.
people lose a lot of money doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like we were like Teresa and I were like contracted by another company to do what we thought was going to be an art project. I had this idea for something called Miriyama cards, which are kind of like tarot cards, but for storytelling. Like each card will connect to any other card, so you can kind of like tell a
Sort of like a
story.
choose your own adventure kind of deal.
Yeah, and so we created this concept for like this kind of all these monsters in this brand, and we were like, yeah, and you can like and I was writing like weird spooky poetry haikus for each of the different monsters and like the stories, and they were all going to kind of fit together however you wanted. And then they were like, okay, what if we didn't print them? And we're like, okay, and like, and what if they were NFTs? And we're like, and they're like, and what if we made like 500 of each of them, and you just dropped everything except for like a few colors? And we were like, oh god, no.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and then they ended up canceling it too because like the NFT bubble burst so hard, and I had a
So
few
fast
friends,
too. That did not stick around long at all.
and so yeah, funding comics is hard. It's really really hard and confusing, and you have to be very scrappy or very lucky, or you have to have a really great job that lets you totally bankroll yourself.
Right. And also a Kickstarter. I mean, to stand out
Hmm.
on Kickstarter is difficult. I think for
Hmm.
anybody, but in particularly, I think in the fantasy and the genre or the fantasy and horror genres
Hmm.
are just so flooded.
Hmm.
It's it's very difficult to stand out. But I feel like this is something that does because you don't often get, supernatural mixed with a detective story, mixed
Hmm.
with like a Hollywood story. Like it's really a bunch of different stuff rolled into one series.
I know we just keep adding like adjectives, as we go along.
Right, and, like, now, a couple more issues, we're gonna have time travel and psychedelic stuff going on, and so, I mean,
Exactly.
it's great, there's literally something for everybody if you read long enough.
Yeah, no, it's definitely I definitely am proud of the fact, and like I kind of woke up and realized like, oh, like this is a story that like literally only I could tell because it's just like a string of like my like unrelated interests all being woven into this narrative basically.
Right, it's like intrusive thoughts instead of being acted out, they're gonna go on a page, like
Absolutely. So that was a kind of a cool moment where I was like, this actually does have a very unique visual and thematic identity, and so I felt pretty good about that. Although I will say, everything everywhere all at once totally blew up my spot, totally crushed it, did it way better than I'll ever be able to do. So that's unfortunate, but they did a fantastic job.
Well, you see, I don't think you should concentrate on trying to do better because
Hmm.
that's gonna be very difficult to do, that was an amazing movie.
Yeah.
But you can make your own and make
Hmm.
it different, That's what people, I think, need to focus on more than trying to make their thing better than what's out there. You just need to make it
Totally.
different.
Yeah, and to be fair, this is the 1920s. This is a Lovecraft horror story. that's a modern multiverse absurdist masterpiece in its
Oh
own.
yeah, 100%. So like I said, different.
Yeah.
It's similar concept eventually, but at the same time, like it's completely its own thing.
Hmm.
And especially with a lot of horror stuff nowadays, it's what's the latest vampire you've got for me? What's the latest werewolf you've got for me? What's like and there's a few people that are able to do those like and make them still interesting and different and original, but it's few and far between.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember like the original concept for our kind of ultimate, top of the food chain, Lovecraftian entity came from when I think I was must have been 2014 or something. I read this book about like In Search of the Multiverse, and it kind of like blew my mind, like just like the theories about what could be happening and whatnot. And and then I attached that mind blow to the nightmare I'd had about the black strings, and kind of came up with this idea for like a multiversal spider who doesn't like doesn't care about you individually. You're just like, a speck of a speck of a speck. If they notice you, they want to eat like the entirety of you, like across every timeline. That's the only meal that's big enough for an entity like that.
So it's not just you, but it's your literal entire existence.
Right. It's like, in Rick and Morty terms, it's like eating every single Rick or every single Morty across, every goofy
I would
timeline.
say I've y'all can grill me in the comments if you like, but I've never watched a single episode of Rick and Morty. I don't know what it is about that show, but it's just never appealed to me. Like
that was one of the first pop mainstream uses of the multiverse theory, I felt. And so that was kind of one of those like first moments where I was like, ooh, I'm taking too long to write this. Like people are doing multiverse stuff. Stephen King's been doing multiverse stuff since The Dark Tower. So,
I mean, and if you really want to get into it, you can go all the way back to like the Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Yeah, people have been doing multiversal stuff for 200 years now, I feel like.
And all Marvel and DC for like, for
oh god, since at least the late 90s, early 2000s.
Exactly. So yeah, so trying to rush to be first is a pointless thing to do anyway.
Yeah, I'd rather do it right than do it first.
Yeah, hence why I threw out like 300 pages of script and started over again.
But that's another common thing I hear with comic book creators is like they'll have something almost done, and then they'll think of one plot hole they screwed up or one thing that they wanted to add that they didn't get a chance to, and they're like, nope.
Yeah.
Scrap the whole thing, start over.
Yeah, I mean, issue 4 specifically is like that, like, I don't know, that bottleneck, that like focal point where it took me like almost 2 years to write just this issue. Because prior to this moment, Harvey Bolton, who's kind of like, I mean, this is a weird image of him. He's he's normally wearing a shirt and looks like a noir detective. Right. But here we go. Here's a better picture of Harvey. We got the, Harvey looking like a very sexy drifter.
with the Walter too.
Yeah, from World War I. And he kind of initially just showed up and was like cool and like knew what was going on, and that was like his whole thing. It was like he'd be like, I've seen this before.
Right.
And I kind of realized, I was like, oh, he has like no arc or tension. He's just like the cool dude,
no character growth going on, like
exactly. And so I kept rewriting issue 4 over and over and over and over again, and I couldn't understand why it was not working. And then I realized it was because like he kept like succeeding and not screwing up the mission in issue 4. And I realized that was just fundamentally not like who he was. Like he's a character who's, driven by revenge and by pain and trauma. And he has a chance to try and like, get a little small piece of revenge in that issue. And I kept just like breezing past that moment and being like, yeah, he keeps his act together. And it was like, of course he doesn't. Why would he do that? He barely knows Rosie. So why is he going to why would he, he's been hunting this guy for like years,
Right.
And then that is like the thing that the entire like series like turned on, and it worked, because if he's gonna try and blow his cover to get revenge, he's gonna screw this up. He's gonna get the attention of the bad guy, which is gonna get the attention of the horrible entity, and like a series of dominoes just went off. And then issue 4 took me like a year, 2 years to write, Issue 5 I wrote in like a week and a half because it just was like all cause and effect, just like boom, 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 boom.
What it's like once you get that one little piece that you can't
Yeah.
figure out, it's like the piece in the jigsaw puzzle. There's a
Hmm.
one piece over here. If I could just find that one damn piece, I can get this whole section done.
Yeah.
And then you
And that's
finally find it and you're like off to the races.
and that's kind of like I think because issue 8 was another similarly weird issue that took a very long time to write, and I kept wanting to keep this one character alive, and my editor Lisa, who's the best, FYI, shout out to Lisa Vilmil, and we were like, why? How could this character outsmart this character? Like, he has never done that before. Why is he doing that now? And I was like, oh God, but he's so funny. Like, we can't kill him, and we did. Yeah.
How is that as a writer when you like fall in love with one of your own characters and then you have to kill them off later?
It's
Like,
well,
what's that like?
it's terrible because like it blinds you. Like I'd say, all of my worst moments of writer's block was like, my brain just like passing over like the idea this character could even possibly die. Like it's not even like I dwell on it. I'm just like, well, of course they figure this out. Anyway, moving on. And then like, 30 rewrites later, I'm like, no, there's no way he's not gonna die. Like there's just no way. It's kind of like it's what's so refreshing about George R. R. Martin's work, is that like like if you make you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
Right. So before I let you go and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday night,
Mhm.
where can people find you? Where can people find Ithaca if they want to pick it up?
Mhm.
And what do you got coming down the pipeline?
Yeah. So Ithaca is spelled with a Q, but with no U afterwards. Kind of hard to write. But so you can go to ithacacomic.com to buy either the digital issues or the physical issues.
And you
If
can
you're
find that right there at the QR code on your screen or down in the description below this video. Or if you're listening on Spotify the day after, it's down in the description as well.
Perfect. If you're in the Tompkins area, we're in Buffalo Street Books and Comics for Collectors. And if you're into webtoons, I've recently started putting one page a day on webtoons for the last year or so. So we're kind of in the early parts of issue 3, and I'm definitely excited to kind of grow our webtoons following. So if you're on that platform, please go and subscribe, and that would be
Heck
great.
yeah.
And then what's
Especially
on Friday?
daily pages, man. You get something new every single day.
Once a week,
Oh,
Thursdays.
once a
Thursdays, yeah,
week.
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I misspoke.
Hey, still once a week. I mean, some books, you got to wait like 6 months for the next issue. Like, I'll
That's what's
take it
good
a
about
page at a
seeing.
time if I have to. That's better than nothing, man.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad because even with like all the delays for issue 6, we're still only like barely into issue 3. So issue 6 is on the way. We're currently in the coloring stage. We're doing some pretty wacky stuff with cosmic perspectives, so that's taking some time. But everything is written at this point, and so probably we can look forward to a Kickstarter in the fall for another 2 issues, and we'll just
Nice.
keep typing away at it until we either Kickstarter away to being finished or until a publisher is like, yes.
No, that's amazing. And I've been flashing down on the bottom of the screen all his screen names. You guys can follow Michael everywhere on social media, pretty much. Even some accounts that I don't have on here because I found them later. So if you're online, look for Ithaca Comic Book, and you're probably going to find this guy. If you
Yeah,
also want to help support the show and help us help the indie comic book community to grow, you can check out our merch store, get a t-shirt, get a sticker, get a hoodie, all kinds of stuff. We are going to have some new stuff coming out very soon for summer, so keep an eye out for that. I want to get some kind of shorts going, some tank tops, stuff like that for everybody to keep cool in these summer months. And also, if you are interested, please give us a follow on Spotify. It helps out a lot. Everybody, please be safe, be kind. We will see you guys same time next week. Take it easy.